To this now, some business organizations are calling on President Cyril Ramaphosa to refer the National Health Insurance Bill back to Parliament. Following the adoption of the bill by Parliament in November, Business Unity South Africa and Business for SA have expressed some reservation. They want the President to test the constitutionality of the bill. And of course, this is not new. There's been quite a lot of reaction, especially when it comes to this particular bill. Let's speak to Martin Kingston, Business for SA Steering Committee Chairperson. Thank you so much, Mr. Kingston, for your time. I remember last year sometime there was, of course, a petition that was prepared by yourselves and Business Unity South Africa to send to the President last year in the wake of this particular bill, as well as the developments in Parliament. And I wonder if this indeed did happen and what was the reaction?
Well, you're exactly right. We did indeed send
Mr. Kingston, pardon me. Mr. Kingston? All right, Mr. Kingston, pardon me, your line is not so clear. We're struggling to hear you. So I'm going to ask the team if we can try to re-establish a better line with you, because this is quite an important conversation, especially when you think about the fact that right now, there are some who are still saying that it is something that South Africa needs, universal access for all, but there are still some reservations from some certain, sectors, especially who are involved in this particular process and the execution thereof. So let's try again and see if we are able to hear you, in fact, this time. Let's try again, Mr. Kingston. Martin?
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, definitely. We can hear you better now.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
I can hear you perfectly.
Perfect. I think let's try to continue then.
I can hear you perfectly.
All right, let's continue then. Let's start with the petition and give us a sense of how things ended off there and where they are now.
Well, we sent the petition to the President at the end of last year. That's appropriate under the circumstances. The bill had served in front of both the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. It went through, I have to say, with absolutely no input taken into consideration from any of the multiple hundreds, indeed, the National Department of Health would say thousands of submissions. And it was effectively rubber-stamped through the National Council of Provinces. Even the provincial submissions were ignored in that process. We don't think that there was due process in terms of considering the various inputs that were given. We think that there are both procedural issues, that's the rubber-stamping process that I've talked about, as well as substantive issues. For example, many of the sections we believe are unconstitutional. Section 33, for example, which gives the minister unfettered power with respect to the role of medical aid schemes. We think that's not appropriate. We've had many examples in South Africa of full discretion or unfettered powers given to ministers that need to be appropriately circumscribed or curtailed, where there needs to be a suitable consultancy process put in place. The second is that it appropriates responsibility to the National Department of Health in the bill for the levying of taxes. We know that that's the responsibility of the Minister of Finance. That can only be done through a money bill. We'll see that, of course, soon in the context of the budget. Thirdly, there is a question as to the role of the provinces, actually taking away the powers of the provinces and centralizing it. There are a number of contractual provisions which we're concerned about, including having a single fund. And most importantly, we think that it takes away the right to choose for citizens who want to actually procure healthcare from private or other sources, should they so desire. We've brought all of these matters to the President's attention in our petition, as we did in our engagements with the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. I have to say, we're not alone in this, Bongiwe. I mean, there are many other people, A, who have petitioned the President, and B, who have made similar input or given similar input in the parliamentary process that has taken place to date. We also think that we need to make sure that we can bring in and crowd in all of the skills, all of the resources, all of the expertise and the capital that's available in the country, as we did during the pandemic, as we're doing currently in looking at energy, transport and logistics and crime and corruption, by actually ensuring that the business community at large and the private sector more broadly can actually participate as a partner rather than being subsumed by NHI in a bill that we have claimed is ill thought through, poorly conceived, unimplementable and actually unfinanceable in its current form and structure.
And what happens now then? Because that becomes a big question, because when you think about the fact that, there are some who still maintain, particularly those who are for the bill, they say that this takes us a step closer when it comes to universal healthcare access. But there are still some concerns from your side as well that this is simply unaffordable. So what happens now?
Well, we firmly subscribe to the need for universal healthcare coverage as a matter of urgency. We saw during the pandemic how important that should be and needs to be, and indeed that's the situation that we find ourselves in today, particularly those who have least access to care. We think that that can be done in a variety of different ways. We think that there's much of the bill that we can work with, but we think that in its current form, as you've said, it's not viable and unimplementable. In a country where, as we know, we've got huge fiscal pressure currently, we'll see what types of commitments the Minister of Finance gives in his budget in a couple of weeks' time. But we don't think that it's affordable as currently structured. We also think that there's many details that have yet to be worked through. We don't want to alienate or undermine confidence in the country, where we know that confidence levels are already fragile, where, as I said, there's limited fiscal headroom for anything. In fact, we have a situation at the moment, as we know, where doctors cannot be taken onto the payroll of the state because the funds are not there. This is a much more fundamental commitment where the architecture needs to be right, the resources need to be skilled, specialist and appropriate, fit for purpose. We think all of that can be done, by the way, but it's going to take time. Even if the president were to sign the bill into law with immediate effect, the reality is that rolling out NHI is a multi-year, multi-phase process, as indeed provisioned under the bill as it currently stands. So we need to manage everybody's expectations. We'd much rather get it right than for the president to sign something into law that we think is unconstitutional and which is bound to be challenged in the courts, whether it's challenged by business or other interest groups. We know that it will be challenged legally. We don't want a stillborn process. We want one that is successful from the start.
Will business be challenging it? Will, in fact, your organization, are you looking at those options?
We're looking at those options. We've made no decision as to what we will do. That option is always available to organize business if they decide to go down the route. That is our least preferred option, by the way. The best thing is actually to make sure that having gone through the process thus far, the president returns it to Parliament so that it can be considered in terms of where it complies and where it doesn't, where all inputs from all stakeholders can be appropriately considered, taken into consideration and either accepted and adopted with an appropriate adjustment to the legislation or not, as the case may be. And we've indicated repeatedly to the government that we're keen to work in partnership with them in crafting something that is viable and implementable and serves everybody's best needs.
Do you think there's pressure because elections are coming?
I have no doubt that this is a key element and plank of the election platform, and so it should be, the need for universal health care. It doesn't need to be signed into law to achieve that. I mean, actually, we've already got a bill that has passed both the National Assembly, as I said, and the National Council of Provinces. And whether it is part of an election manifesto or not, the reality is that there will be no immediate universal health care under the NHI that's available to any citizens of the country with immediate effect. As I indicated, this is a multi-year, multi-phase process, and therefore we need to ensure that when we embark upon that journey, it's one that is implementable, viable, and indeed financeable, and achieves the objectives of all parties concerned by crowding in the resources, capabilities, and expertise that's available in the country. So we will have to see what happens as a consequence of the announcement of any elections. We won't be surprised if it's a fundamental plank. Indeed, universal healthcare should be a fundamental plank, but it doesn't need to be in the form of the current legislation.
All right, let me thank you so much for your time. And let's see then, as you say, you're still exploring all options on the table. And let's see what becomes the next move then. That was Martin Kingston, Business for South Africa Steering Committee Chairperson.